to those photos. Can you describe what you mean by that?
There was an audible reaction. There was a visceral reaction. And let me describe to you what happened, possibly by accident. Before we were actually shown the exhibits that we were supposed to see in the order that they were supposed to.
She was 14, and the man who says he cannot tell you how she died just spent an entire morning proving it. You already know how this usually goes. Somebody dies, and within a week, the experts have an answer. The DA has a headline, and the story moves on. That's not what happened here. Not even close. Day 4 of David Burke's preliminary hearing, and the deputy medical examiner finally took the stand. Dr. Grant Ho, the man whose office spent months deciding what killed Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And here's the part that should stop you cold.
There is a lot of back and forth during this cross-examination now of Dr. Grant Ho, but he repeated findings from the medical examiner's office that have already been published. This was released months ago. We have reported on this, but he walked us through, with the support of visuals this time that we have not previously seen from the autopsy. He walked us through what they already found months ago. They decided the cause and manner of death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was homicide, and they attributed her death to multiple penetrating injuries. Here's what's interesting, though. They did not identify what kind of weapon or tool caused those penetrating injuries. And they stopped short of actually calling it a penetrating injury caused by a sharp instrument. So they're not saying that she was definitely stabbed to death. And that's because of the advanced state of decomposition. They simply don't know for sure exactly how or what caused a lot of what they found.
After all that time, after all those tests, he stood in front of a judge and said he still can't tell you what weapon did it.
Eligible for the death penalty. Here's what else the deputy medical examiner doesn't know for sure. And defense leaned really hard into all of this on cross. They don't know which penetrating injury occurred first. There's one on the victim's abdomen, and there's one on her lateral left chest. So one is associated possibly with liver damage, the other possibly with rib damage and diaphragm damage. Deputy Emmy can't say which one happened first. He can't say definitively whether or not they may have happened seconds apart. He cannot say which one caused her death. He cannot say how long it may have taken Celeste to die from either one of those injuries. There's so much we simply
can't tell you which wound came first. Can't even rule out a gunshot. Sit with that for a second.
exhibits.
Let me tell you why that's so significant. You know, but our audience should know. One of the special circumstance allegations in this case that has been presented by prosecutors is that David Anthony Burke personally used a deadly and dangerous weapon, a sharp instrument, to commit this crime. And yet what you're telling us is this deputy medical examiner can't definitively say that that's the case.
Prosecutors say Burke used a deadly weapon. That's one of the special circumstances that could put him on death row. And the state's own medical examiner just told the room, under oath, that he can't confirm it. Not won't, can't. You already knew something didn't add up here. And look, I need you to stay with me for this next part, because it gets worse before it gets clearer. Go back 4 months. The remains are found, decomposed, dismembered, inside a Tesla. The medical examiner's office does the autopsy and comes out with a statement saying this child may have been in that car for a long, long time. Then something strange happens.
So, quite a few parts to that question, Jesse. First, about LAPD and the LA County Medical Examiner's Office. Nothing specifically related to that back and forth came up today. And of course, after the ME's office did the autopsy, right, they came out with a statement saying the victim may have been in that car for quite some time, and then LAPD made a motion requesting that no additional details come out from the autopsy, and then the medical examiner issued another statement saying that they just want transparency around this case. They need that to do their jobs properly. So there was that a couple months ago. This morning, that specific back and forth was not referenced.
The LAPD steps in and asks the ME's office to hold back details, not release everything, sit on it. The medical examiner's office pushes back, publicly, saying they need transparency to do their jobs. Two agencies that are supposed to be on the same side fighting in public over how much the family and the public gets to know. That's not speculation. That happened. That's on the record. Here's the thing, though. Nobody's told you why that fight mattered until this week. Because now we know part of the answer.
Was not referenced. Now, there was a question about that delay, right? 3-month delay. And Dr. Grant Ho explained very clearly on the stand, it was because they had to do some ancillary testing. They were basically waiting for the toxicology testing to be done because they wanted to rule out that an overdose played a role in her death. Once they got that toxicology report back, and all they found was inconclusive for methamphetamine, negative ultimately for benzos, and a very, very low detection of ethanol in her liver that Dr. Ho says may have actually been produced by the body itself as it was decomposing. After they got those results back, they went ahead and they attributed her death to the multiple penetrating injuries. So basically, they had to wait a couple months so that they could rule out an overdose.
Julia Deng, thank you so much for coming on. As always, I know you have to get back into the courtroom.
It took 3 months to determine cause of death. 3 months. And Dr. Ho explained why on the stand. They were waiting on toxicology, waiting to rule out an overdose. When the results came back, the drugs that showed up were inconclusive, negative, or so faint they may have come from her own body decomposing. So they landed on homicide, multiple penetrating injuries. But even that phrase, penetrating injuries, is a phrase chosen because they couldn't prove it was a knife. They couldn't rule out a bullet. 3 months of silence, and the answer is still this incomplete. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because if the medical examiner can't nail down how the defense saw their opening and they took it. A defense attorney stood up and asked Dr. Ho something nobody expected.
So much we simply don't know. And that created a gap for one of the defense attorneys to ask something that we have not heard yet in this case. She asked this witness, this deputy medical examiner, if he could rule out that Celeste may have inflicted both of these stab wounds on her own. And he said, based on his findings in this autopsy, that was not something that he could definitively
Could he rule out that Celeste inflicted those wounds on herself? He said no. He couldn't rule it out.
Definitively rule out. The reaction in the courtroom following that line of questioning, though, I turned around and I could see a couple people, glancing at each other, eyebrows raised. It looked and felt to me like people watching this line of questioning felt like it may have been bordering on the absurd. It may not be something a jury would believe.
People in that courtroom exchanged looks. Eyebrows went up. You could feel the room deciding whether that question was a real defense or a Hail Mary. Maybe both. But ask yourself why a defense attorney would even go there, unless the science left her room to. This wasn't an accident, the prosecution says. Not an accident at all, they've argued, for months. But watch what's happening in that courtroom right now. The certainty everyone assumed was already locked in, the murder weapon, the timeline, the motive, none of it is locked in. Not yet. And I want to slow down here for a second, because this part isn't about legal strategy. It's about a 14-year-old girl whose parents are in that courthouse right now, walking the halls, choosing not to sit through testimony about maggots and open chest cavities, because no parent should have to. I don't know how you sit in a hallway while strangers argue over your daughter's cause of death, using words like penetrating injury instead of her name. That part isn't a legal question. That's just wrong, and I don't think I need to convince you of that. Okay, let's build back up, because there's more here. The chainsaws. 2 of them. Found in Burke's garage about a week after the Tesla turned up with her remains inside. Tested negative for blood. One chainsaw reportedly missing entirely.
So the witness was very careful to answer that line of questioning. He noted, I think, several times that he is not an expert when it comes to tools, power tools used to dismember bodies. He did offer up some general knowledge about what might lead to the types of cuts that he noted on the victim's body. He described it as clean or smooth around the edges. That, though, I think is going to be called into question as well, because the appearance of all of these wounds, right, they have changed post-mortem during decomposition. But he talked about how to cut through soft tissue or organs, you can do that with a scalpel. He talked about how to cut through bone, you might use something like a bone saw. And he said to cut through rib, you would need something essentially like hedge cutters. That's what he said on the stand. Still, he cannot definitively identify what was used to...
The witness on the stand admitted he's not an expert in power tools used to dismember a body, but he described the cuts on her remains as clean, almost smooth. Clean cuts on a body that had already been decomposing for weeks. Ask yourself what that actually tells you, because even the witness wouldn't commit to an answer. And here's a detail that barely made headlines. An hour, maybe an hour and a half after Celeste was dropped off at Burke's home in the Hollywood Hills, a call went out from his phone to her number. It rang through to voicemail. Nobody can prove he's the one who made that call, but somebody made it from his phone to a girl who, by every account, never used hers again. You know, just like I know, that detail doesn't prove murder on its own. Circumstantial evidence rarely does, one piece at a time. But stack it. The Tesla tracked driving north towards Santa Barbara County. The phone tracked with it.
Case. But defense, right, they jumped in immediately on cross and said, you cannot prove David was actually the one in the car. You cannot prove David was actually the one using his own phone. But there was an outgoing call about an hour, maybe an hour and a half after Celeste would have been dropped off at his home in the Hollywood Hills from David's iPhone to her number. But again, like defense attorneys noted, nobody can prove just yet that David was actually the one who made that call that went to voicemail. I think prosecution brought that up as
the unexplained call, the chainsaws, the purchases the defense says all happened after she died, as if that somehow makes what happened next less monstrous. Actually, wait, let me rephrase that, because I don't want to get ahead of what's actually been proven in that courtroom. What's been proven so far is enough for probable cause, just enough to send this to trial. The prosecutor knows it. She walked in relaxed today, more relaxed than she's been all week. That tells you something too. What hasn't been proven yet is everything else. No video, no eyewitness, no confirmed murder weapon. Just a medical examiner who spent months trying to give you certainty and walked away with less than he started with. Here's the part nobody talks about. This is exactly how these cases get buried in doubt. Not through some grand cover-up,